The most dangerous thing about this battle isn't Moro's power. It's how calmly the universe allows it to be taken away. This isn't a clash decided by faster fists or louder transformations. It's a slow distortion of balance, where every second that passes quietly shifts the weight of existence itself. Goku isn't just fighting an enemy here. He's fighting a system that turns life, planets, and time into fuel. And that changes the rules long before the first decisive blow is thrown. Because Moro doesn't challenge strength directly, he invalidates it. What makes this confrontation unsettling is that raw power becomes a liability. Every surge of energy feeds the very thing Goku is trying to stop. In most Dragon Ball arcs, escalation is the answer. Push harder, transform further, break the ceiling. Here, escalation collapses inward. The more power enters the field, the more the universe bleeds. Moro's ability isn't framed as a technique. It's framed as entropy with intent. Energy absorption at a planetary scale reframes combat from domination to depletion. The battlefield isn't just space. It's the life force of worlds being quietly erased while the fighters are still standing. That alone elevates this fight beyond spectacle into consequence. Goku's presence brings an entirely different tension than usual. Ultra Instinct represents mastery without waste, movement without excess, reaction without ego. And for the first time, that philosophy isn't just stylistic. It's necessary. Any wasted motion, any unnecessary burst of power, directly accelerates loss elsewhere. This is where the arc sharpens its narrative edge. Moro isn't stronger than the gods because he hits harder. He's stronger because he exploits the structure of power itself. Gods, angels, mortals, all of them draw from the same universal pool. Moro simply reaches further into it than anyone else dares. Power scaling here stops being linear. It becomes ecological. Goku's usual role as the breaker of limits is inverted. Now he has to restrain himself while facing an enemy who grows precisely because restraint exists. That paradox is the core tension of the fight. If Goku unleashes everything, Moro wins faster. If he holds back, Moro still feeds, just more slowly. Either path carries a cost that can't be reversed by a wish. This is why the battle feels heavy even in its quieter moments. Every exchange is measured not by damage dealt, but by energy shifted. By what's taken from the universe to sustain the fight. The stakes are no longer about survival in the moment. They're about what kind of universe remains afterward. Moro embodies an older kind of villainy in Dragon Ball, closer to cosmic parasites than tyrants. He doesn't want control. He wants consumption, and that makes him fundamentally incompatible with Goku's growth-driven narrative. You can't outgrow a void that expands by being filled. As the fight progresses, strategy begins to outweigh instinct. Positioning matters more than force. Timing matters more than transformation. Even Ultra Instinct, usually portrayed as the ultimate answer, becomes fragile here, not because it fails, but because perfection still costs energy. And Moro is patient enough to wait for that cost to accumulate. There's a quiet dread in realizing that the universe itself is the collateral, not cities, not civilizations. The raw potential that allows anything to exist at all. And once that context settles in, every movement between Goku and Moro carries a different kind of gravity. Because this battle isn't asking who wins. It's asking what's left when it's over. And that question lingers, unresolved, as the balance continues to strain and the line between fighter and fuel begins to blur. At that point, the fight stops resembling a traditional Dragon Ball escalation and starts behaving like a long-term collapse in slow motion. Moro doesn't rush. He doesn't need to. Time itself is working for him. Every breath taken on a distant planet, every residual energy left behind by past wars, every careless surge of ki in this battle feeds into the same unseen reservoir. That's what makes Goku's position unusually fragile. For once, speed and reflex alone can't erase the problem. Ultra Instinct allows him to avoid damage, to strike without hesitation, to move without conscious thought. But it doesn't solve the underlying equation. Avoidance doesn't starve Moro. Precision doesn't exhaust him. The universe keeps paying the bill regardless. This is where the arc subtly reframes intelligence as power. Moro's greatest advantage isn't absorption. It's understanding scale. He knows he doesn't need to overpower Goku directly. He only needs to survive long enough for the environment to turn hostile. And unlike most villains, he's comfortable letting the battlefield do the work. There's a psychological imbalance here that often goes unnoticed. Goku thrives in moments where improvement is visible, where progress feels tangible. Against Moro, progress is deceptive. Each successful dodge, each clean hit, creates the illusion of control while the larger system continues to deteriorate. It's a fight that punishes optimism. Even the presence of divine elements doesn't offer safety. Gods of destruction, angels, ancient techniques, all of them are revealed to be participants in the same energy economy. Moro's threat exposes a weakness in the cosmology itself. Power was never meant to be hoarded on this scale. And yet the universe has no defense against someone who treats it as a resource rather than a law. That realization adds weight to every moment of hesitation. Goku isn't just choosing how to fight. He's choosing how much damage is acceptable in the process. That moral tension quietly replaces the usual thrill of escalation. Victory that costs everything stops being victory. As the exchanges continue, the contrast between the two becomes sharper. Goku represents refinement, years of discipline distilled into instinct. Moro represents accumulation, centuries of consumption layered into a single entity. One is about minimizing waste. The other is about maximizing intake. They're not opposites in strength. They're opposites in philosophy. This is why brute force never feels like a satisfying answer here. Even when Goku gains momentum, there's an awareness that momentum itself is temporary. Moro doesn't panic when pressured. He adapts by widening his reach, by extending the fight's footprint beyond what can be seen or sensed directly. The universe keeps shrinking in subtle ways long before anyone notices. There's also a quiet commentary on legacy embedded in this confrontation. Goku's growth has always inspired others to rise alongside him. Moro's growth leaves nothing behind. No disciples, no worlds capable of recovering, just absence. That contrast turns the battle into a referendum on what kind of power deserves to exist. And as the strain builds, the fight edges closer to a point where skill alone won't be enough. Where the question shifts from how to win to whether winning is even possible without breaking something fundamental. The longer it continues, the more the cost becomes unavoidable. Because in a battle where energy itself is the prize, every second survived by Moro is a second stolen from existence. And as that truth settles in, the margin for error narrows, the pressure tightens, and the confrontation drifts toward a moment where restraint and destruction begin to blur into the same choice. What intensifies the pressure is that the usual safety nets no longer apply. Dragon Balls can restore lives, rebuild planets, rewind devastation. But they can't restore energy that was never allowed to circulate naturally. Moro doesn't destroy in a way that leaves something to repair. He consumes in a way that leaves nothing to return. That distinction quietly raises the stakes beyond any single timeline or wish. Goku senses this, even if it's never spoken outright. His movements grow tighter, less expressive. There's a noticeable shift from exploration to conservation. He's no longer testing boundaries. He's protecting what remains. And for a character defined by pushing limits, that internal reversal carries real narrative weight. This is also where Ultra Instinct evolves from a spectacle into a burden. Perfect reaction means perfect efficiency, but efficiency under these conditions still isn't free. Maintaining that state demands harmony with the universe. And Moro is actively disrupting that harmony. The technique isn't failing. The environment it depends on is eroding. Moro, on the other hand, appears increasingly grounded. The more he absorbs, the less he needs to rush. His confidence doesn't come from dominance in the moment, but from inevitability over time. He understands that if the fight continues long enough, victory becomes statistical. Probability bends in favor of the one draining the system rather than relying on it. That dynamic quietly reframes Goku's role in the story. He's no longer the embodiment of infinite growth. He becomes a finite protector in a finite universe. And that limitation forces a kind of maturity rarely demanded of him before. Not restraint as discipline, but restraint as responsibility. There's an almost uncomfortable stillness in certain exchanges. Moments where neither side presses forward aggressively. Those pauses matter. They signal that both fighters recognize the same truth. Escalation accelerates collapse. Each choice carries consequences that can't be undone by strength alone. From a power scaling perspective, this fight deliberately resists clear hierarchy. Moro isn't simply above Goku or below him. Their strengths operate on different axes. Goku dominates the immediate exchange. Moro dominates the long game. And the longer those axes remain misaligned, the more unstable the conflict becomes. That instability bleeds into the arc's larger themes. The Dragon Ball universe has always rewarded those who seek strength for its own sake. Moro represents the endpoint of that logic taken too far. A being who pursued power without purpose until the pursuit itself became destructive. In that sense, he's less an anomaly and more a warning. As the tension tightens, the battle begins to feel less like a contest and more like a test. Not of who hits harder, but of who understands the cost of continuing. Goku's growth has always been outward. Here, growth demands inward judgment, knowing when not to push, knowing when strength must give way to something else. And that's where the fight edges toward its most dangerous threshold. A point where instinct alone can no longer decide the outcome. Where the universe itself feels stretched thin. Where every remaining option carries risk, not just to the fighters, but to everything that exists beyond them. Because once a battle reaches the stage where energy is no longer renewable, where balance can no longer self-correct, the final question stops being about victory altogether and becomes about whether stopping now would still leave something worth saving. That realization reshapes the final stretch of the confrontation in a way that feels almost uncomfortable for a Dragon Ball battle. The tension no longer comes from wondering who will overpower whom. It comes from watching how close the universe is to structural failure. Moro doesn't need to announce that threshold. His presence alone defines it. Goku's restraint, at this stage, stops being tactical and starts becoming philosophical. Every choice reflects an awareness that power, once unleashed, doesn't disappear when the fight ends. It leaves scars in the fabric that supports everything else. That awareness weighs heavily, because it runs against the instinct that has defined him since the beginning. Moro senses this hesitation and treats it as confirmation. Not weakness, but inevitability. He understands that a protector must calculate losses, while a predator does not. That asymmetry is what makes him so dangerous. He isn't fighting for dominance. He's fighting for consumption, and consumption has no natural stopping point. There's a quiet cruelty in how he forces that dilemma. By existing, by continuing, by making every second of survival an act of theft, it turns the act of fighting itself into a moral burden for Goku. The longer the clash continues, the more complicit the combat becomes in the damage being done. This is where the narrative weight of the arc fully settles in. The battle exposes a flaw in the Dragon Ball worldview, the idea that power is always the solution to power. Moro exists outside that logic. He feeds on it. And that forces the story to confront something it rarely does. Limits that cannot be surpassed, only respected. From a strategic standpoint, this is the moment where creativity matters more than escalation, where the solution cannot come from adding more energy into the system, but from denying it entirely. Moro's strength is environmental, which means the answer must be structural, not forceful. Goku's struggle, then, isn't just against an enemy. It's against habit. Against the reflex to answer pressure with more intensity. Breaking that reflex becomes the true challenge of the fight. And that internal conflict carries as much weight as any physical exchange. By the time the confrontation approaches its resolution, the atmosphere feels fundamentally altered. Not triumphant, not desperate, just heavy, as if the universe itself is holding its breath, waiting to see whether this cycle of accumulation finally reaches a stopping point. Because regardless of who stands at the end, this battle leaves behind a lesson that can't be ignored. Power without balance isn't evolution. It's erosion. And a universe that allows itself to be endlessly consumed will eventually have nothing left to defend. That's what makes Goku vs. Moro more than another high-stakes showdown. It's a moment where Dragon Ball briefly looks inward, questioning the cost of its own foundations. A fight that forces growth not through transformation, but through restraint. And long after the last exchange fades, that question remains. Not about who was stronger, but about whether strength alone should ever be enough.